The Virtual Curbside is a production of the Utah chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Utah AAP, working together to improve children's lives through education, advocacy, and networking. Hi, this is Paul Wirkus from the Utah AAP. Welcome to this week's edition of the Virtual Curbside, where we bring pediatric providers together with subspecialists to get smarter about all things pediatric and better acquainted as a community of caregivers. The Virtual Curbside is brought to you in part by a generous grant from Primary Children's Hospital. Primary Children's Hospital, the child first and always. Welcome back to the Virtual Curbside. There are topics sometimes that I think we have a lot of acquaintance with, but don't have a lot of depth of knowledge about. And in recognition of the AAP's new book, which came out September 10th, 2025, called Fostering Care, Healthcare for Children and Adolescents in Foster Care, we want to do a deep dive into foster care this month. And the first obstacle to that is, while I think we have some acquaintance with foster care, I don't think we really understand the mechanism of foster care. It's our great pleasure this week to have Kyla Clark, the Assistant Director of Utah's Child Welfare System, who's agreed to come on and try to explain in about 30 minutes what would usually take, I think, 6 to 8 weeks of orientation for most people. Kyla, thanks for being willing to come on.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited for the challenge of explaining it all in 30 minutes.
I think there are concepts we talk about and terms we use without really understanding what they mean. And they have very deep meaning, I think, in terms of the way we take care of kids and even deeper meaning in the lives of these kids. And so I think we need to understand more. Before we start, do you have any conflicts of interest that you need to disclose?
I have no disclosures.
How long have you worked in the child welfare system in Utah?
I have been with Utah's Child Welfare System, or DCFS, as it's called here in Utah, for 18 and a half years.
Oh my goodness. You've seen a lot of program and you've seen a lot of stories in the process.
Yeah, been involved in a lot of lives.
Yeah, and the hope every time is to try to make the best life possible for each of your clients.
Yeah, so Utah's Child Welfare System's vision is safe children, strengthen families. Two really short sentences, but very profound. And I like to paraphrase our Director of Health and Human Services, who says, the removal of a child is the most profound act of government power that exists. We don't take it lightly, and there's a lot we do to try to prevent a child needing to come into foster care.
So what sorts of things would trigger a child ending up in foster care?
So to come into foster care, there has to be substantiated abuse, neglect, or in Utah, there's also dependency, meaning at no fault of the caregivers, the child needs to come into care. Sometimes that can be for really complex medical or behavioral needs that the family can't meet through community resources.
And what are the usual triggers that would make that happen?
So in Utah, about 70+% of child welfare removals involve some parental substance use. Other things can be domestic violence, physical abuse of a child, sexual abuse of a child, and then you have that small group that comes in because they can't access care in the community.
What's the legal and regulatory framework that governs foster care?
Utah state law defines what constitutes abuse and neglect. So that is in the 80s section of the Utah State Code. And that will outline what is considered neglect and what is considered abuse that gives child welfare the authority for a removal. And removal is always the last step. We also have authority for court-ordered in-home intervention. If we can get involved before it's an immediate safety concern that the family needs to be separated, we do have the authority to court-order services into the home to try to prevent removal.
We'll dive a little bit more deeply into that for a minute. In your experience, obviously you've looked at this, how much variability is there between states in the rules that govern foster care?
I think abuse and neglect is fairly similarly defined across all the states. The dependency and when a kid can come into state's custody for no fault of the parent varies dramatically among states.
Okay. And is that a newer part of the regulation, or has that been a longstanding thing?
That has existed as long as I have been around with DCFS. We are always looking to bolster community support so that number of kids that need to come in on dependency goes down. We also used to take kids that were ungovernable. There has been some statutory changes to move that to more of the juvenile justice system. That happened back in 2018.
Okay. How are foster parents selected? I'm guessing there must be certification or training required.
Yeah, so there are foster parents recruited through Utah uses one contract for our adoption levels of care. So those are foster care levels 1 through 3. And we use a contract with the Utah Foster Care Foundation. And they recruit families who then go through our Office of Licensing, which is under Health and Human Services, where they have a home study, there's background checks, they do a training program through Utah Foster Care. And then they are licensed foster parents that we can place children with. And then internal to us, we have staff that are resource family consultants who are assigned to each of these foster homes who help when a kid comes into care, identifying the homes to place the children in based on the children's needs.
Does certification, is that a limited term sort of thing? Do people do recertification of some sort?
Yes. So they license every 3 years. And I want to specify, we also have certified foster homes, which are our level 4 through agencies. So DCFS directly licenses some of the homes, and other homes are certified through child placing foster agencies, or a term that most people may have heard are like proctor agencies. So there are both kinds of homes. For our licensed foster homes, it is every 3 years. They get relicensed, or it can, if there's been some sanctions or some things that they need to remedy, sometimes they will be certified annually or licensed annually.
Are all of these homes with families, or some of them more institutional?
So this level is all family based. So we do have kind of two distinct separations in how we talk about placements. We have family based placements, which we have a continuum of. So family-based placements that take basically easy children without behavioral needs.
Sure.
And then we have all the way up through some really high-level family-based that are treatment-focused for kids with maybe complex trauma or some difficult behaviors. And all of those are family settings. And sometimes they have their own biological children. Sometimes it's a single parent. There's a wide gamut of what those family-based settings look like. And then we also have our settings where they're staffed, where it's rotating staff coming in to help take care of kids. We have those as small as homes with 3 children in them, all the way up to our larger residential institutions that have 16 beds.
I'm guessing finding the right fit is one of your biggest challenges.
Yes, definitely having the right resources at the right level to find fit. We constantly have, unfortunately, sometimes where kids have to wind up in a higher level of care because there isn't a home for them at a lower level of care based on age or size of sibling group. So it is definitely a constant effort that my directs team makes to recruit and have the wide variety, because you never know who's coming in the door. That's the other fun part of foster care, is there's no real way of predicting whether today the removal will be a baby or tomorrow it might be a sibling group of 6 kids ranging from 17 to 3. And so having resources available to meet this diverse, unpredictable need is always a challenge.
Tell me about the concept of kinship care. How is kinship care prioritized and vetted?
Now, kinship care is actually our number 2 priority. Our number 1 priority is kids remaining safely at home whenever possible. So can we wrap services around a family so that they don't have to have that relationship disruption?
Right.
If that is not an option, kinship is our first exploration. So we will try initially safety planning with the family, getting to know who their extended family is that can come in to try to keep that kid home. And if not, then we do, who is the family that could step up and have these children live with them? They do also have a home study. We do run background checks for the family members as well. They actually can go on to get licensed so that they get the foster care payment that community family would get. and really looking to support as much as we can kids staying within their natural support system.
It sounds like that's something that, where possible, does sort of preserve the notion of family in a way. And it sounds like the levels of care are sort of based on how much injury do we have to do to the concept of family to keep this child safe.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And balancing what are maybe the treatment needs of the child, right? So we do recognize that sometimes we may be getting involved later in life of a teenager who has experienced some trauma and maybe does need a little bit of stabilization in a higher level of care for a little while. But it's always with the focus of how do we connect them back to a family setting or ideally their own family.
Let me go back to what you were talking about a minute ago. What sorts of in-home services and safety plans do you do to keep someone at what I guess I'm understanding now would be a level 1 arrangement?
Actually, this would be a before level 1. A level
Oh,
1
okay.
is still a removal situation. For our in-home, we have protective services that can be court ordered. We actually even have collaborative services ahead of time. So when we get a call for a CPS investigation, we see the gamut of where people are in stages of change, right? And so we have some families that really have been sort of crying out for help. And when we get there, as much as nobody wants DCFS knocking on their door, there is a little bit of good, someone's here to help and they're ready to engage in services. So we have in-home therapies, we have in-home parenting classes. Utah has a evidence-based in-home parenting model offered through Utah Youth Village that actually made the federal clearinghouse for the Preservation of Families Act, the FFPSA Act. So we're really lucky that we have a homegrown program that meets that rigorous criteria that can really help stabilize parents that maybe had their own trauma growing up, maybe have kind of learned maladaptive parenting behaviors that we can intervene with and really start seeing much different parenting approaches. We also have services like our parent-child residential drug treatment programs. We're really lucky in Utah to have 5 of those, where maybe a young mother struggling with substance use can actually stay with her baby in that treatment program, where we don't have to do that separation while they get sober, while they get the treatment that they need. So we have a few different tricks up our sleeves to say, okay, if a family's really willing to just work with us collaboratively, like they're ready for help, we can start that touch. We can also then move on to court-ordered interventions that are in the home to keep families together. And then worst case, if we do need to come into foster care, we focus on that reunification. When safe, I mean, there are always a handful of cases where it really is the necessary intervention and it's not safe for a child to go back, but that is never our starting place.
I think that leads to an interesting point because I think that we're speaking here to medical providers that I think that the reluctance that a provider has to make a referral to DCFS, and I think the fear that a family has when DCFS is involved is that this is going to involve some sort of, I don't mean in a physical sense, but some sort of violence to the family. And I think from what you're saying, and I think from my experience in some of the times this has happened, is that in some ways, this is like throwing somebody a lifeline.
Can be, absolutely. And I think that there's a lot of fear, and I totally understand it. Like we talk about what Tracy Gruber says about it being the most profound thing a government agency can do.
Right.
I think people think that there's a lot of removal when it's actually a very small percentage. So we receive on an annual basis to our intake line about a little over 40,000 reports of abuse and neglect. Only about half of those result in an investigation. They'll meet criteria for abuse and neglect. Sometimes we'll get calls that we're not able to go out on because if you don't have a way to locate the child, a actual allegation that meets the definition of abuse and neglect, and a child, because sometimes people will call and they'll be 20 years old and we're not able to respond. You have to have those 3 things for us to be able to investigate. So sometimes we'll get calls that don't meet our criteria and we'll try to warm outreach those to different areas. Like we don't respond during pregnancy, but if you call on a pregnant woman, we will refer those to options to help a pregnant woman. So we narrowed down quite a bit from the number of calls to who actually we respond to. From those investigations, we have about 20,000 investigations a year, and we wind up with about 3,000 ongoing cases between in-home and foster care. So it really is very unlikely. Right now, we have only about 1,600 kids statewide in foster care, and some of those have been there for a long time. Removal really is a very small percentage of what we do. We have a lot of upfront services, a lot of safety planning. We have a beautiful family engagement opportunity called our family action meetings, where when we have identified a safety concern, we're reaching out to extended family on both sides to come together to create plans to remediate that safety so that the child doesn't need to leave the home. Most of our effort is actually in trying to prevent the need for removal. And that I don't think is often synonymous with what people think DCFS does.
Right. Because I think all of us have some sort of latent fear that I'm doing something wrong and somebody's going to come tell me what I'm doing wrong. And worse yet, that's going to have dire consequences for me and my family.
Absolutely. And I think that the more that we can educate around what we're trying to do to really help families get to a place. My predecessor used to say to enjoy DCFS services one time, but we want to get in and help and connect to community and safety so that we're not who we have to call, because we are the scary elephant in the room.
Right. Can you help me understand what a guardian ad litem is?
Yeah. So when a case does go on to court, they are an attorney for the best interest of the child. So DCFS is still the guardian of the child. They are in our custody at removal, but they have an attorney assigned to them through the guardian ad litem's office, which is basically a third perspective between DCFS and the parental representation, the parents' attorneys. There's also an attorney representing the best interest of the child.
So give me an instance where that might come up, situation where you might need to involve the guardian ad litem.
So all children brought into juvenile court through DCFS will be appointed a guardian ad litem. That is a standard procedure, whether it's an in-home case or a removal case.
The appointment is made, but when would that person need to weigh in on a decision?
They are part of the child and family team on all of our cases. So they would be privy to all of that information. When a kid is in foster care, they have a guardian ad litem. They also have a fostering healthy children nurse assigned through Integrated Health. So they're technically not a DCFS employee, but they work with us to make sure that the healthcare needs of kids in foster care are met.
When a child arrives in a clinic accompanied by their foster carers, who consents to care for that child?
We have entrusted that the foster parent can for routine care. If they do need a surgery, if the parents still have rights, we'll have to get the biological parents' approval as well as DCFS. But for your standard well child care, the foster parents can do that.
Including things like immunizations and...
Immunization should be covered by the child and family team prior to youth going. If a youth comes into care without having had their immunizations, we have to meet with the biological family. That is a residual right of the parent, even when they're in state custody, to tell us yes or no on immunizations.
In a foster care arrangement, how does HIPAA affect that? Who can receive information?
So the foster parents are considered, they are licensed through us. They are an extension of child welfare. So they can receive the health information at the visit as the carer of the child. They are bound to the confidentiality of that information through their licensure with us.
And if the biologic parents call, they are also entitled to the information?
They are also entitled. Healthcare information is still a right of the parent until their rights are terminated.
And so I'm guessing that all the notion of scheduling and follow-up also is the responsibility then of the foster parent.
Yes.
Great. What's the caseworker's responsibility in all this?
The caseworker's responsibility is to be aware and supportive of coordination. And again, if the decisions start becoming more than your routine well child appointments, they need to be involved or involving the health nurse in it. The reality is if it gets complex medical, they need to be pulling the team meeting together. They're probably not the best to know single-handedly the right answer, but they should be pulling a child and family team together with the medical provider and our fostering healthy children nurse to make sure that we're making the best choices in the best interest of the child.
Excellent point. Can I talk to you about some other alternatives to foster care? So we talked about the in-home services. How does the notion of voluntary placement with relatives differ from kinship care?
Yeah, they're very similar. I think it depends on the severity of the situation. If we are concerned that a parent may give voluntary care to a relative to get essentially DCFS to go away and then go pick up the kid tomorrow and put them back in the same dangerous situation, we'll often push for a more formal kinship care. Sometimes the relatives will want us to push for something more formal because the informal placement doesn't restrict a parent's access. So really, the line between when a child has been removed by child welfare and whether or not comes down to restricted access of the parent.
I
And
see.
so some of these voluntary situations are great because you have a parent who's at a great stage of change and they recognize they're not safe to be around their child. But sometimes that's not where the parent's at, and these relatives won't have the ability to say no if they came to pick up their children. And so that may be a reason why we go with a more formal removal and kinship placement to be able to have a little more teeth, if you will, behind that placement.
Okay, so it's a little bit more formal.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the difference between legal guardianship and foster care custody?
So legal guardianship can be given to a relative early on, but they won't have, when you're in foster care, every youth automatically has foster care Medicaid. They can become licensed providers and get paid. The custody, there is some specified relative grant. It does change a little bit of the benefits available to a family. And that's really the biggest difference there. And then a little bit on legally how the parent may challenge getting their children back. So in our case, if we take custody and place their kinship, we will most likely be ordered to work reunification with a parent. If custody is directly granted to the grandparent or relative, there isn't necessarily a presumption of services towards reunification.
So yeah, let's talk about the various endpoints of foster care. What are the possible endpoints?
So the endpoints of foster care, the goal is reunification most of our time. So it could be that the kids go home, they go on a trial home placement for a little while, we stay involved, make sure that it's going well. Custody is returned. We may do an in-home services case for a few months, make sure that it's going well, and then we hope that was their journey and we don't see them again. And then if we can't reunify, then there is permanent custody and guardianship to a relative. So we could give permanent custody to an extended family member. Sometimes those family members live outside of the state. So once we know they're not going to reunify with a parent, we may start working on an interstate compact with a grandma or an aunt that may live in a different state. Or it might be permanent custody and guardianship to a non-relative. We have seen an uptick in that happening where it's a foster parent who is asked to take permanent custody and guardianship, or it's adoption and a termination of the parental rights and then a move towards an adopted home.
And the goal of all of those is the best interest of the child, right?
Absolutely. These are all best interest decisions for the child.
Two questions. How long is the average stay in foster care? I'm guessing that's a very difficult question to answer because it depends on each individual case.
Yes. So federally, we are required to have really good answers at a 1-year mark. So we have a 6-month review hearing required by federal law to say, where are we at in progress? At 1 year, we have to make arguments as to why we want to keep reunification going. And there is 2 90-day extension opportunities beyond that. At that point, we have to then be ending reunification, moving towards adoption. Now, with some of our older kids and dependency, those timeframes don't exist federally. And so sometimes those are the kids that you'll see. They tend to be our older teenagers and they tend to be in our custody longer and at risk of aging out of our system. But on average, Utah does have the majority of our cases managed within the year. There's an outcome within the year.
And the ones that go beyond that, I'm guessing those are the ones that you really sort of scratch your head over.
Yeah, I mean, there will be some times where like we are in that first or second 90-day extension. And sometimes that's just parents that maybe weren't quite ready for change initially. And we got a few months in, and sometimes that 6-month review hearing can be one of those jumpstart points where they suddenly realize this is for real and I've got to engage and do something different. And so sometimes we will be granting those extensions because we do see parents engaging in services and making changes. It just sometimes isn't on day one. Some people aren't ready to go the second DCFS shows up at their door.
Let me back up just a little bit. Who all is involved in that 6-month review? What's the structure of that? What's the aim?
So it is a court hearing. So the judge, the guardian ad litem, the parents, the parental attorney, and DCFS. And the aim is to really say, when a kid gets removed, we create a child and family plan on how to get that child back home. So a 6-month review is to look at to say, is the plan working? Do we need to change this plan? What are the barriers? Why hasn't it worked? Or good news, we're coming along. We were seeing progress, and we think it's very likely that the child will be able to go home in the next 6 months.
In your experience, do most children stay in a single foster care setting during the whole time? What fraction of kids bounce around?
That depends. That differs a lot. And again, it also looks differently. There's different reasons a child may bounce around. So we may identify kinship placements later. So a child may be in a foster home and we've found a relative a couple of months in, and so they move to a relative. So we have kind of two fractions of the moves. We have planned moves, and then we have unplanned moves. And we do see, unfortunately, with some of our kids with behaviors, they do tend to have more moves because it's just really hard to predict how you will respond to the 8-year-old throwing a really big tantrum in your home. And so we do a lot to try to preserve a placement whenever possible, but we do have movement. I don't have a hard percentage for you. And then we do have, kinship families that also maybe are well-meaning but not able to actually keep that placement. So those disrupt as well, but they do disrupt less often than our foster placements.
You alluded to the concept of aging out. When does a child age out, and what's that process?
So that can be anywhere between 18 and 21, depending on where they are functionally. And we do everything we can to avoid it. It's what I personally consider our system's failure. Nobody should have to leave a foster care situation. I don't know. I have 2 daughters in their 20s, and I can't imagine them not having anyone to call. I think I've got 4 text messages from them in the time we've been on this podcast. And so thinking about truly a kid who has experienced complex trauma, who's experienced a child welfare system, hitting the end of the line without a support community just is heart-wrenching. So what we see with those are sometimes it's children who have really do not have attachments to anyone and refuse to be adopted, don't want to be in that kind of setting. Sometimes it's youth that we see. I don't know if you guys are familiar with like the Wednesday's Child episodes on the news. Like these are kids that aren't looking out, but they tend to have some prickly behaviors or some complex trauma that there just isn't a ton of people lining up for adoption or custody, unfortunately. And so we do transition to adult living classes. We do, Job Corps and other programs. We have some educational vouchers. We do try to have them connected with the best opportunities possible. And then until the day that court case closes, we are still trying to relook at extended family. Sometimes even parents that maybe had their rights terminated years ago, relooking at, have they made significant changes? Are they now safer? Or now that this person is a young adult, are they safe enough that this child doesn't leave the system completely disconnected?
As you mentioned a minute ago, family is sometimes messy, but family is something that for most of us, we have the luxury of being able to rely on as both a point of support, but also in some ways as a matrix of the way we build our lives going forward. And it seems that what you're trying to do, and hats off, what you're trying to do is give each of those people the chance to grow up healthy and safe and strong.
That is our goal. We want safe children and strengthened families, and that can look a wide variety of ways in the last 18 years of my career, but that is always the focus.
And I suspect your career has been full of, as anything involving families, full of lots of highs and lots of lows.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We have beautiful moments where we get to be part of something really unique, where you can see change in people that you know is going to have a multi-generational impact. Like when we are successful in helping a parent relearn how to parent or change generational trauma, you get to be a change agent for something that will impact for years and years. And that is such a beautiful moment, such an opportunity that most people don't get. But then you also see some of the worst things in humanity. And it's a really hard job when you are faced with some of the horrific abuse that does occur to children. Right. And so you always have to juxtaposition those things, and you're going to have your hard moments and you're going to have your wins.
We're going to be talking over the next couple of weeks with a physician about some of the medical challenges of foster care. Do you have any messages for the pediatric caregivers who are listening today? Anything that you would offer as encouragement or things that you wish you saw from medical providers helping with these kids?
I would just encourage requesting to be part of the team. Every one of our cases should have a child and family team, and medical who is working with these kids is absolutely a vital part of that. And I think that helps get the larger lens, because what I think sometimes with these cases, everything is really complex. And you may be seeing one sliver of a bigger pie. And so being part of that child and family team is a really great way of seeing kind of the holistic, what's going on with this family and how all the different pieces are trying to come together to be in that best interest of the child.
Very helpful. Ms. Clark, thank you so much for taking some time with us today. I think I understand the process, over the course of my career, and that's, more than a couple of years. I've seen a lot of kids in foster care, and I've seen several of them who have gone on to be adopted, and it's been a very interesting process. I've also had a couple of families where reunification worked really well. But my hat's off to you for being willing to help administrate a program that I think really, although I think is very complicated, offers hope to kids and families. So thanks so much for your time. Thanks for your expertise.
For having me.
All right. And to our listeners, thanks for listening and thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to getting together again next time. The Virtual Curbside is available on iTunes or wherever you find your other favorite podcasts. Be sure to like us and subscribe. We want you to like us both because we're needy that way and because that will help other listeners like you find us. Check out our website, vcurb.com, for supporting materials, schedules, and other great stuff. The Virtual Curbside is an educational production of the Utah chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics. The opinions expressed in this podcast, while carefully considered, are ultimately the opinions of the presenters and not necessarily of the American Academy of Pediatrics or our employers. And remember, the content of this podcast shouldn't be seen as a substitute for seeking actual personal medical care. If this is an emergency, hang up and dial 911. Otherwise, schedule a visit with a caring healthcare provider to try to get to the bottom of your concerns. None of this could happen without Elisa Stoddard, our extraordinary executive director of the Utah AAP. Many thanks to Tim Cosgrove for his help on the website and logo design. Thanks to Phil Wirkus, who also composed the theme music. See you next time.